The suitcase never arrived. Flight 247 from Vienna had landed exactly on time. Passengers gathered around the baggage carousel. One by one, suitcases appeared. Black, blue, silver, large, small. Families smiled as they collected their luggage. Business travelers hurried toward the exit. The conveyor belt slowly became emptier until only one man remained standing. He checked the baggage tag again, then the display screen, then the empty conveyor belt. Surely another cart was coming. Another wave of luggage. Another announcement. Nothing. The belt stopped moving. The silence felt louder than the noise that had come before it. An airport employee approached him politely. "Sir, I believe your suitcase did not arrive." The word struck harder than they should have. "What do you mean it didn't arrive?" The employee apologized. "We're locating it now. It may have been loaded onto another flight." "May have." His voice rose. "Everything I need is in that suitcase." The employee nodded sympathetically. "We'll do everything we can." The young man walked away, unable to hide his frustration. His clothes, his laptop, important documents, a watch his father had given him years earlier. Everything was gone, or at least, everything felt gone. He wandered through the crowded terminal. Departure boards flickered endlessly. Announcements echoed from every direction. Children laughed. Pilots hurried toward departure gates. Families reunited after long journeys. The airport continued functioning as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Only his world had stopped. He sat heavily on a row of empty seats overlooking the runway. Outside, aircraft rose effortlessly into the sky, one after another. People were leaving. People were arriving. The world refused to pause for a missing suitcase. "You seem to have lost more than luggage." The voice came from beside him. An elderly man sat quietly with a paper cup of coffee resting in his hands. The young man sighed. "You wouldn't understand. I've lost everything." The old man looked toward the runway. "Everything. My clothes, my work, my valuables, my plans, my week, my peace of mind." The old man nodded thoughtfully, then asked only one question. "What was your name before the suitcase disappeared?" The young man looked confused. "What? What was your name? Before you lost it?" "My name hasn't changed." "No," the old man replied. "It hasn't." Another aircraft lifted into the evening sky. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The airport seemed strangely peaceful, despite the constant movement. The old man sipped his coffee. "I've watched airports for many years. They reveal fascinating things about people." The young man shook his head impatiently. "I'm really not in the mood for philosophy." The old man smiled. "I know. That is usually when philosophy becomes most useful." Silence returned. The young man stared at the baggage claim receipt, still clenched tightly in his hand. He couldn't stop imagining the suitcase. Where was it now? Another airport? Another country? Another conveyor belt? The old man quietly continued. "Interesting. You lost a suitcase." He paused, and within minutes, you began speaking as though you had lost yourself. The sentence landed with uncomfortable precision. "I didn't say that." "You did. You said, 'I've lost everything.'" The young man opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. Had he really said that? He had, without thinking, without noticing. The old man slowly stood. He looked toward the endless stream of travelers moving through the terminal. "My name," he said calmly, "is Friedrich Nietzsche." A boarding announcement echoed across the airport. Passengers hurried toward another gate. Life continued moving in every direction. The suitcase was still missing, but for the first time, the young man wondered whether something far more valuable had quietly disappeared long before flight had even landed, not from the baggage carousel, but from the way he had learned to measure himself. The airport never slowed down. Flights departed. New passengers arrived. Announcements echoed to the terminal every few minutes. Some people were beginning new lives. Others were returning to old ones. No one seemed to notice the young man, sitting motionless beside the baggage claim area, except Nietzsche. The philosopher watched the crowd with quiet curiosity. Have you noticed something? The young man looked up. What? Everyone here is carrying something. He glanced across the terminal. Rolling suitcases, backpacks, briefcases, shopping bags, children holding stuffed animals, travelers protecting passports. Each person seemed careful not to leave anything behind. Nietzsche continued, human beings become remarkably attached, not only to what they own, but to what they believe those things say about them. The young man looked down at the baggage receipt, still folded in his hand. It wasn't just luggage. It contained important things. I don't doubt that, Nietzsche replied. But answer me honestly. If the suitcase had contained nothing but old clothes, would you feel exactly the same? The young man hesitated. No. Why not? Because he searched for the right words. There were things in it that couldn't easily be replaced. Nietzsche nodded. A watch from your father. Your laptop. Your documents. He paused. But listen carefully. You have mentioned objects. You have not yet mentioned yourself. Silence. The airport never slowed down. Flights departed. New passengers arrived. Announcements echoed to the terminal every few minutes. Some people were beginning new lives. Others were returning to old ones. No one seemed to notice the young man, sitting motionless beside the baggage claim area, except Nietzsche. The philosopher watched the crowd with quiet curiosity. Have you noticed something? The young man looked up. What? Everyone here is carrying something. He glanced across the terminal. Rolling suitcases, backpacks, briefcases, shopping bags, children holding stuffed animals, travelers protecting passports. Each person seemed careful not to leave anything behind. The young man realized he had described everything he possessed, yet almost nothing about the person who possessed it. The philosopher slowly stood and began walking to the terminal. The young man followed. They passed luxury boutiques filled with expensive watches, designer luggage, jewelry displayed beneath bright lights. Travelers stopped to admire them. Some walked away smiling. Others walked away wanting more. Nietzsche stopped before one display window. Inside stood a leather suitcase, far more expensive than the one that had been lost. He pointed toward it. Imagine I bought this for you. The young man looked at the elegant case. It would be beautiful. Then imagine someone stole it tomorrow. He nodded slowly. I would be upset. Of course, Nietzsche replied. But would you become less intelligent? No. Less honest? No. Less capable of love? No. Less courageous? The young man smiled faintly. No. The philosopher looked at him. Then why does the mind speak as though losing possessions means losing yourself? The question settled into the silence. They continued walking until they reached a large window overlooking the runways. Aircraft accelerated before lifting effortlessly into the sky. Nietzsche pointed toward one of them. An airplane carries passengers. It does not become its passengers. He turned toward the young man. You carry possessions. Do not become them. For several moments, neither spoke. The word seemed almost obvious, yet he realized how rarely he had lived as though they were true. His confidence had often depended on what he owned, the suit he wore, the title on his business card, the watch on his wrist. Even the laptop in the missing suitcase had quietly become part of the story he told himself about who he was. Without noticing, he had allowed objects to become pieces of his identity. Nietzsche quietly continued, there is nothing wrong with owning beautiful things. The danger begins when beautiful things begin owning you. The young man looked back toward the baggage carousel. It had already started carrying luggage from another flight. Dozens of new suitcases circled endlessly. Each one belonged to someone. Each one would eventually disappear through the exit doors, just like the people pulling them. The philosopher smiled gently. Notice something remarkable. The carousel never tries to keep a suitcase. It simply lets each one pass. Another silence. Perhaps the secret wasn't learning how to own things. Perhaps it was learning how to let them go without believing that something essential had left with them. For the first time since landing, the young man unfolded his clenched fingers. The baggage receipt slipped gently into his pocket. The suitcase was still missing, but the panic that had once filled him no longer seemed to fit inside the same person. The airport lights grew softer as evening settled outside. The rush of arriving passengers slowly gave way to the quieter rhythm of late-night departures. The young man was still waiting, not for the suitcase anymore, for his thoughts to settle. Hours earlier, he had believed the missing luggage had ruined his entire journey. Now, he wasn't so sure. His phone vibrated. A message from the airline. "We have located your suitcase. It has been found in another airport and will arrive tomorrow morning." He stared at the screen. Only a few hours ago, those words would have felt like a rescue. Instead, he simply smiled. Nietzsche noticed. "Good news?" "They found it." The philosopher nodded. "I expected they might." The young man looked surprised. "You weren't worried?" "I was never worried about the suitcase." He paused. "I was curious about the person waiting for it." Silence. The airport continued breathing around them. A little girl ran toward her grandfather and embraced him tightly. Nearby, a businessman argued loudly over a delayed connection. A musician quietly carried a worn guitar case toward security. Every traveler held something different. Every traveler believed something different was essential. The young man looked through the terminal. For the first time, he wasn't seeing luggage. He was seeing people, each carrying invisible baggage no conveyor belt could ever return. Old disappointments, expectations, titles, pride, fear, memories. Nietzsche followed his gaze. "Those are the heaviest suitcases." The words landed gently. "No airline ever loses them." The young man laughed softly. "And no airline can return them either." The philosopher smiled. "Exactly." They walked together toward the large windows overlooking the runway. Aircraft continued taking off into the night. Some disappeared into clouds within seconds. Others remained visible until they became tiny points of light. The young man spoke quietly. "When my suitcase disappeared, I thought I had lost control." Nietzsche nodded. "What did you really lose?" He thought for a long moment. "My illusion that everything important could be packed." The philosopher's eyes brightened. A valuable discovery. He reached into his coat pocket and removed an old boarding pass. Its edges were worn with age. He held it between two fingers. Every journey teaches two lessons. One about the destination, the other about the traveler. He released the boarding pass. A gentle breeze carried it across the empty observation deck before it disappeared into the darkness. Most people only noticed the first. The boarding announcement for another flight echoed across the terminal. Passengers stood, collected their bags, checked their passports, prepared to leave. The young man looked down at his own boarding pass. Then, almost instinctively, he folded it and placed it in his pocket, not because it defined him, only because it served a purpose. Nothing more. Nietzsche turned toward the departure hall. Before disappearing into the crowd, he stopped one final time. Without looking back, he spoke. "Own many things if you wish." He paused. "Just never allow them to become the answer to the question, 'Who am I?'" The philosopher disappeared among the travelers. The young man remained standing beside the glass. Tomorrow, his suitcase would return. His watch, his clothes, his laptop, his documents. Everything would once again be exactly where it belonged. But something had changed forever. If the suitcase had never been found, he would still have lost possessions. He would no longer have believed he had lost himself. Outside, another aircraft lifted into the night sky. It carried hundreds of suitcases, thousands of objects, countless stories. Yet none of them could ever contain the true weight of a human life, because the most valuable part of any journey has never been what we carry. It is who remains when everything we carry is gone.